All right, welcome back. In this lecture, we're actually going to be finishing up talking about Egyptian civilization. I know that I had mentioned on the last video that we were going to have 3 videos. The second was going to be on culture and societal structures, and the third was going to be on religion and mythology, but I figure I could roll those together. Partially because when it comes to when it comes to societal structures, a lot of the same things that show up in Mesopotamia do show up here. So I'm going to focus on what's different instead of rehashing what's the same about them. But then also because of the fact that religion and culture are so closely intertwined, and I guess you could say the same thing for Sumerian or any other type of civilization, but still, because of that fact, I'm just going to wrap this up in one other video on Egyptian civilization. 2 videos to cover over 3,000 years of history and civilization, but here we are. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever played any civilization-style video games, and I know I played some of those when I was a kid, but you basically have the option at the beginning of a lot of those games to play on an easy mode, a medium or intermediate mode, an advanced mode, or a god mode. And I like to talk about Africa as trying to play the civilization game on god mode, because most of the continent is completely inhospitable. You have the largest desert in the world, the Sahara Desert in the north, as well as the Kalahari Desert in the south. The Sahara alone is larger than the entire contiguous United States. Then you have one of the densest and most dangerous jungles in the world, the Congo rainforest, that occupies the middle part of the continent. You also have a lot of the most dangerous animals in the world are in Africa, most dangerous being the mosquito because of the various types of diseases that it carries. There are a couple of Goldilocks zones. You have what's called the Sahel, which would be between the Sahara Desert and the Congo River Basin. And there are some civilizations that pop up there. We'll talk about some of those in later lectures. But even if you're able to build a civilization there or a society there, what are you going to do? It's virtually impossible to ship things because the coastline is so smooth. It's very difficult to have ports, deep water ports, to be able to ship things out. I guess you could cross the desert, and some people did cross the desert, but that's also very, very difficult. So because of that, really the only place on the African continent that lent itself to being able to build a civilization easily would be the Nile River Basin. So the Nile River exists because of the fact that Africa is not one tectonic plate. It's actually located on 2 tectonic plates. You have the Nubian plate, which is the western, let's say 90% of the continent, and then you have the Somalian plate, which is the eastern, let's say 10%. And those 2 plates are shifting apart, and because of that, they're creating this rift, this tear, called the Great Rift Valley. This is where you have Lake Malawi and Lake Tanganyika that rise, and out of Lake Victoria flows the Nile, the Blue Nile River. The Blue Nile and the White Nile River combine, and they flow north all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. And the Nile River is very, very easy to it's very conducive to agriculture, let's say. The people who planted and harvested, who farmed that region, they were able to use what's called the broadcasting method. The broadcasting method is literally you just walk around with a bag of seeds and you cast them. You just kind of throw them out onto the ground, and then another farmer would come behind you with some oxen, and those oxen wouldn't even be attached to anything. They wouldn't have a yoke, a plow, anything like that. They would literally just stamp the seeds into the wet soil with their hooves, and then you would just wait. You'd wait a few months, and some other farmers would come along and they would harvest, and they would gather the grain. And because Egypt has such a hot, dry climate, that meant that you're able to stockpile a lot of grain, which means that if you have some good years, you're able to stock up grain that's able to last you through the bad years. And because of that, Egypt is very stable. You also have a lot of labor that is freed up if you want to build some giant stone triangles that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So Egyptian civilization is very distinct from Mesopotamian. We notice this, I like to talk about in the aesthetics. Different pantheon of gods altogether, whereas in Mesopotamia they were worshipping On and Ishtar and Marduk. Here in Egypt they're worshipping the sun god Ra, they're worshipping Isis, Osiris, Horus. We'll talk more about them later. In Mesopotamia, they're using cuneiform. In Egypt, they're using hieroglyphics. In Mesopotamia, they are building ziggurats. In Egypt, they're building pyramids. And even when it comes to the aesthetics of the way that their kings stylize themselves, you see up here Sargon of Akkad, and we notice this with Nebuchadnezzar, Tiglath-Pileser, so the Assyrians, the Babylonians, they have these big braided beards, and the pharaohs have a different type of headdress that is very distinct to their culture. They're also largely clean-shaven, except for a narrow beard that comes only from their chin. So different aesthetics, different style, and therefore we would say a different culture or a different civilization. We already talked about how it was Pharaoh Menes or Pharaoh Narmer who was able to unite the upper and lower Nile river basins, unite the white crown and the red crown into the double crown. And so this means that Egypt moves forward through history as one civilization. You do have Kush further south, upriver. And the Kushites are distinct ethnically, linguistically, stylistically, culturally, and again, we'll talk about them in a different lecture. But we already talked about the fact that also that Egypt, as such, whenever you're talking about it as a civilization, it lasts for thousands of years. And what we mean by this is that it's the same rituals, the same gods, the same. If you think of it embalming, if you think of the office of pharaoh or the office of vizier, this would be something that was pretty persistent all the way from Pharaoh Menes up until really the time that the Romans took over. Even if you have Nubians or Libyans or the Hyksos that rule, they rule from Egypt and they rule as Egyptians. So what does that look like? Societal structure would have been hierarchical, the same as you see everywhere else. There's a little bit of room at the top and a lot of room at the bottom. So you have slaves, peasants, craftsmen, and merchants. And then higher up than that, you have the scribes. You have soldiers, those who are armed. Above that, you would have government officials, the vizier. So think of the word advisor, the priests, the nobles, and then at the very top you have the pharaoh. So we can start at the bottom. Similar to like with Mesopotamia, the less skilled your labor is, the less valuable it is. So if you're a slave, largely you would be doing domestic chores. Some agricultural work, a little bit of construction work would also be peppered in there, but largely slaves were used for maintaining households. Then you have the peasants, farmers, you have craftsmen who were able to do things like spin linen or able to do things like carpentry, and then merchants who would buy and sell the wares that were created by others. They could also take these Egyptian wares out of the Nile, sail them into the Mediterranean, and trade with the Hittites or with the Mycenaean Greeks, or trade with the Babylonians even. Or different Mesopotamian civilizations. As you go further up the pyramid, you have the soldiers. You'll notice that especially early in Egyptian history, these soldiers do not seem very well equipped. They have a spear. Spears beat swords 9 times out of 10. They're a better weapon. They have better range, and also they're cheaper to produce. So most of the infantrymen throughout ancient history were spearmen. They had their spears, but you notice he also here has a battle axe, a little hand axe that could be either thrown or wielded in close quarters combat. Their shield would be made of wood, and it would be stretched over with a piece of animal hide. As far as armor, they were not really wearing armor. They were wearing layers of linen that were glued together and that were wrapped over the person, but the heat of the Egyptian sun was not really conducive to being able to wear steel plate armor, or I guess you'd say bronze. What you also see here in the bottom left is really the evolution of what we're going to call the sword. Swords are expensive. They're not even necessarily as efficient as spears, but they are symbols of strength. They're also symbols of leadership, of aristocracy. If you can afford that much bronze to go into one weapon, you're probably a pretty big deal. But you see these two different types of battle axes on the left that wind up morphing and combining into what's called the kofesh. The kofesh would be a very early primitive sort of sword that has a leading edge to it. And then later, after the Middle Kingdom falls to the Hyksos because of their chariots, the Egyptians also do develop chariots. By this time, they are horse-drawn chariots. They are two-wheeled chariots, not like those Akkadian war cars that we saw with the donkeys and the 4 crude wooden wheels. Above the soldiers, you have the scribes. If you wanted to be a scribe, this was considered very high-skilled labor. Think of how long it takes for people to learn how to read and write, even just in English, where you have only 26 letters. So 26 letters are enough to be able to write down every word or thought that I've ever had in my life. But in hieroglyphics, you have somewhere between 700 and 800 different symbols. Some of these represent entire words. Some of these represent phonemes, what would just be a sound. And so it's kind of somewhere between an alphabet system and what we would consider more like a kanji system, like what the Chinese have, where one symbol represents an entire word. Because of this, scribes were in high demand because their labor was not only very difficult to be able to learn, but it was also very useful. The Egyptians invent papyrus, and so sometimes they are engraving these hieroglyphs in stone, but sometimes they're also just writing them down, and this could be anything this could be used for anything from record keeping to tax collecting. A lot, however, of what the scribes would have done, maybe not the majority, but a lot of it would have been the transcribing of religious texts. The pharaoh himself was considered a god, and so the things that came out of his mouth were considered divine. But they also had a large pantheon of God. We'll talk about that here in a moment. And like I said, the priests, one of the main dynamics of Egyptians' politics, let's say, would have been the struggle to maintain power by the pharaoh and the struggle to usurp or to take away that power from his chief vizier or his high priests or some of the higher up nobles. Very common. Because the pharaoh is a god, his afterlife was considered very paramount to the importance of the people. They believed that the possessions that you took with you into the afterlife, you were able to enjoy in the next life. And so because of that, great care went to the preserving, the embalming, the mummification of the pharaoh's body, but then also to store a lot of that pharaoh's favorite treasures in the pyramid, which would be a pharaoh's tomb in the pyramid with him. So because of this, you had in certain circumstances just gold trinkets, a boat that would take the pharaoh across the river into the next life. But in some of the earlier dynasties, you would even have the burial of favored slaves, favored wives that would be taken into the next life with him to enjoy. These could have been buried alive, could have been buried or killed and embalmed and then sent into the next world with him. But still, this was a practice that was abandoned by some of the later dynasties. Pyramids are definitely the main thing that Egypt is known for when it comes to their architecture, when it comes to their aesthetics. The pyramid was the tomb of the pharaoh. And so because of that, you had a lot of labor that went into being able to provide one resting place for one pharaoh. And construction on that pyramid would have started pretty much as soon as a pharaoh took the throne. And so the longer that your reign was, the larger your pyramid would be able to grow to be. You see here at the bottom a layout of some of the pyramidal structures. You have queens' pyramids, plural, that would have housed the bodies of some of the different wives. Remember, this would have been not necessarily a monogamous culture. These pharaohs would have had multiple wives. Remember, we talked about Pharaoh Ramses having 200 kids. You're not really able to get to that number if you have a single wife. But you notice that the pyramid is a complete complex, and whereas a lot of these structures may have been decimated by time, it's really hard to break down a pyramid because even if you think of like wind erosion and things like that, the pyramid is basically a pile. It is a heap of stacked stone, and because of that, it is very resilient to time itself. The Egyptian pantheon of gods consisted of over 1,500 known gods. These are the ones that are named, and there are many others that are referenced, even if they're not referenced by name. Some of the most prominent would have been Ra. Ra was the primordial god. He was thought to be the creator of all. He's the sun god. The sun obviously has a prominent place in the hot desert climate of Egypt. Then you also have this guy just to his right that's called Amun. Amun was really the chief god of Thebes, and so as the city of Thebes rose in power in the middle and late kingdom periods, Amun rose to prominence, and he's even at one point combined with the god Ra to create what's called Amun-Ra. You also have Anubis, pretty popular. He's the god of death. You have Thoth, I believe is how you're supposed to pronounce that, the one that looks like it is Thoth. He's the god of writing and knowledge, and also the moon. And then some of the other gods I'll talk about here in a moment, they are really brought into context, or you can learn what they're the god of, and you can learn about them through what is probably the most prominent myth in all of Egyptian mythology. So as with Mesopotamia, you had the Epic of Gilgamesh. In ancient Egypt, you have what's called the myth of Horus. The myth of Horus starts like this, actually without Horus in the picture. The myth of Horus starts with the sun god Ra being the first and only being, and he creates the world. He creates the sky goddess and the earth god, the sky goddess Nut and the earth god Geb. And Nut and Geb, being brother and sister, they get married, which is, obviously we don't do that today, but apparently it took noble families a long, long time, like many thousands of years, to learn that marrying your siblings and even your cousin is not really the best strategy. Some of this worked its way even into, like, you think of the 1600s, the Habsburg dynasties. But some of this would have been because of aristocratic ideas of blood, and if you have pure blood, then you're not going to marry someone who has, lowly peasant blood. You're going to marry someone with royal blood. Well, who has royal blood? Pretty much just your family. And so as you get into the Christian or AD years, once Christianity has more of an effect on cultures and civilizations, you at least have people moving away from sibling marriage, but you do still have some first and second cousin marriage that would have been going on. But anyway, Nut and Geb marry, they unite, and they produce 4 children themselves. So from left to right here at the bottom, you have Osiris, who was the firstborn, and then you have Set, who is the younger brother. You have Isis and Nephthys, who are both sisters, okay? And the story goes like this. Isis and Osiris, being brother and sister, they also get married, and they create civilization. They take the humans who were basically just, completely uncivilized. They didn't know how to do anything, and they teach them how to work the fields. They give them the Nile River, which makes agriculture very easy for them. They teach them music. They teach them how to make bread, and they also have a child. They have a child who they name Horus, and finally the main character of this story shows up. Set marries his sister Nephthys, and Set being the younger brother, he is jealous of the power and prestige of his older brother, but Osiris is not guiltless in this. Osiris actually takes his brother's wife / his other sister Nephthys and has a child by her, and that would be the god of death Anubis. So Set has both petty and real reasons to hate and despise his older brother Osiris. And so Osiris and Isis, everybody loves them. They're very popular. They're very well esteemed by the Egyptian people, and Set, being jealous of that, decides to take matters into his own hands. He invites his brother to a big old banquet that he has. He feeds him. He gives him, food and drink. He gets him loosened up, and then this is a banquet that has a lot of people in it, apparently, and he does what I'm going to say sounds like kind of the dumbest trick ever to try to play, but it works. He builds this giant golden sarcophagus, and he basically says anybody, and he builds it specifically to Osiris's dimensions, but he says, hey, if anybody is able to fit perfectly into this sarcophagus, then I will give it to him as a gift. And Osiris, being apparently really, really stupid, decides to get in, and when he gets in, he fits perfectly. He wins the contest, sure, but Set nails the lid shut on the sarcophagus and drowns his brother in the Nile River. And odd that he would want a sarcophagus because he's a god. I don't guess he would have died under normal circumstances, but now I guess he also can't breathe underwater, so he dies from drowning. And his brother, I guess just to make extra sure that he's dead, once he's dead, he carves up his body into 14 pieces and then scatters them through the Nile River to the various different parts of Egypt. So Osiris is dead, and Horus, Osiris' son, is very upset by this. Obviously, he wants to kill his uncle and to basically avenge his father's death. They fight. Their fight lasts for several days. They morph into hippopotamuses, and they even fight each other as that, however you're supposed to pluralize hippopotamus, which sounds weird to us, but the hippopotamus would be the second most deadly animal in Egypt. Or I guess third if you would say that humans are the first most deadly, but the hippopotamus is a very aggressive animal. They're known for even killing their own children in order to not have competitors in their gene pool. So during this fight, Set blinds Osiris. He puts out his eyes, and he blinds Horus, rather, Osiris' son. Set blinds Horus, and because Horus is now blind, he's defeated, he is banished, he has to go out into the desert, and Set and Nephthys rule over the Egyptian people, and they're very harsh, they're very cruel, they don't give gifts like music and bread to the people of Egypt, and their reign is thought of as a reign of terror. Okay, so Set and Nephthys are ruling over Egypt. Meanwhile, Isis is going before the other gods and is pleading with them for some sense of justice, and the gods respond to her plea by saying, okay, what we will do is we will grant your son Horus the ability to go into the underworld and to visit his father Osiris. Horus goes to the underworld, he visits his father Osiris, and his father gives him the gift of one of his eyes. And I guess because he is a near primordial god, I guess he's a third generation god, unlike his son, who would be a fourth generation god. Osiris gives his eye to Horus, and his eye is the all-seeing eye. So this is where we get the idea of the eye of Horus that we see in various parts of different symbolic religions, and is very prominent as a symbol throughout Egyptian symbolism and mythology as well. So he gives this gift of his all-seeing eye to his son Horus, and with that gift, with that superpower, Horus comes back and he defeats his uncle Set. Set is now banished from Egypt. He is cursed. Basically, what he has to do is he has to accompany the sun god Ra on his trip over the sky every day, and then whenever the sun descends into the land of darkness, Set has to protect Ra from the serpent so that the sun is able to rise again the next day. I don't really know why Ra would need this help, since he is a absolute primordial god. He's a first-generation god. But that's how the myth goes. Horus takes his place on the throne, and he rules over Egypt. Themes of this story are definitely present. I mean, you can think of the movie Lion King, where you have a king who is killed by his brother, and then that king's son and the legitimate heir to the throne is banished, and then he comes back and he fights off his uncle for his throne. It's also present in Shakespeare's Hamlet. For those of you who are maybe a little bit more cultured, you would know that that's another connection. But this story, even though Egyptian civilization dies, it's interesting to note that this story, this theme, is present in a lot of stories that get told even until today. So that's kind of Egyptian culture, mythology, societal structures. Again, this is a distinct civilization, both aesthetically and geographically. When we look at the way that the states of Assyria, Babylon, Akkad, the way that those states behaved and functioned, and then we look over here at the way that the state of Egypt functioned, we do see that there are some distinctives there. So that's all that we'll do talking about Egypt. Egypt, again, is kind of like a Bronze Age civilization, even though parts of it do persist even into the Iron Age. But I decided to do this video before I did the Persia video, and I might actually do another couple. I'm not sure yet, so I guess you'll find out whenever I decide to do those. But for now, that is as far as I'm going to go with Egyptian civilization. Thanks for tuning in. God bless. Hope you have a great day.